Okay. So we're waiting for Yamana Demisi to log on. I'm going to introduce him to you for our class. Hopefully he will log on to the class, and then you'll be able to see him up there. So let me just introduce who he is. He's an award-winning independent filmmaker who has received numerous awards for his work, including the John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship, the Walter Mosley Award for Best Documentary. By the way, Walter Mosley is an awesome mystery novelist. You should listen. The Locarno Film Festival Production Grant, the American Film Institute's Filmmakers Grant, the Pauline Vieira Merit Award for Outstanding Work in Cinema, the California Arts Council's Artist Fellowship, and the Fun Sub Writing Grant. His films include 2 narrative features, Tumult and Dead Weight, and a documentary called Twilight Revelations, Episodes in the Life and Times of Emperor Haile Selassie. Currently, Yamane is producing The Quantum Leapers, Ethiopia from 1930 to 1975, a 6-part documentary and series focusing on Ethiopian social, artistic, intellectual, political, and cultural history during the Emperor Haile Selassie era. He is also developing a movie called And Then the Rains Return, a narrative feature film set during the 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic, a worldwide catastrophe in which over 15 million people lost their lives. Yamane teaches directing, writing, production, film history, and criticism in the undergraduate department of film and television at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, which I think if you know anything about film, that you know that NYU's Tisch School and UCLA are the top 2 schools in the country, and he did his graduate work at UCLA. So he's a pretty cool guy, and he one of the advantages of living in New York, I think, is that you get to make these random connections. So somebody just told me about this event of people talking about films about Ethiopia that was in Tribeca, so I went, and then he was there, so I said hi, and then I said, could you do this thing? He said, sure. So New York is awesome in that way. I hope you all are taking advantage of it outside this class. So here he is. And likewise, next week, for example, the subject of one of the films we're watching next week was visiting New York from Ethiopia, and I was able to interview him, and I'm going to show you I recorded the interview that I did with him, so you'll be able to see that. So that's the other thing about living in New York that I like. So we had to have a practice run last week so that to see if the technology would work on his end.
Stephen, I can hear you. I'm trying to get the video now.
All right. Your voice is really quiet, so if you could lean into the computer.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the video, there should be that little green camera on the right side.
Yeah, and I'm doing everything that I did last week. Hold on 1 second, sorry. You can still hear me, Stephen?
Yes, yes, we can still hear you.
Okay.
Do you see the little green camera icon?
Hold on 1 second. No, it's not, like right now I have a blank page. Something is happening.
Oh, okay.
Okay, here we go. Can you see me?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you. Hold on, I think you're going to see me now. Because I see the thing loading.
There you are. Yeah, awesome. Oh, great. So welcome to my class. And I I just read the introduction that you sent me about yourself.
All right.
So I'm hoping that you could start off by just telling the class a little bit about who you are and how you got interested in filmmaking.
Okay. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Yamana Dameste, and currently I teach film production, writing, cinema studies, cinema history, criticism, and history here at NYU, and I've been teaching here since 2007. I'm also an independent filmmaker, and I've been making films since I graduated from UCLA. I went to the MFA program at UCLA in film production. I've also worked extensively on film productions in various capacities as an assistant director, as a line producer, and one of the individuals that I worked with is a filmmaker whose film I believe you are seeing or you just saw, Ada.
Yes.
Haile Garima. And I've worked with Professor Haile Garima, who also is an educator and teaches at Howard for many years. I've worked with him on a documentary called Imperfect Journey, which is a documentary commissioned by the BBC about Ethiopia. And I've worked with him on a film that brought him a lot of acclaim called Sankofa, which is a film about slavery.
Yeah, I think it's the best film I've seen on slavery. And
yes, and that came out many, many years ago. I can't even remember now. And I helped him, I think it was in the 90s.
Oh, was it in the 90s?
I helped him with the promotion with Sankofa. And then about sometime in 2004, 2005, I worked with him as first assistant director on Ada, the film that you saw. On my own, in terms of my own work, the first film that I made was called Tumult, and it's a film inspired by a historical incident in Ethiopia. The historical incident was a coup d'etat, an attempt to overthrow the government. There was an attempt against Emperor Haile Selassie in 1960.
Oh, that was the first one.
That was the first one. That was my first feature.
Okay.
I made shorts before that. And that was that takes place in Ethiopia in 1960, and I actually made it in Los Angeles. So I had to find locations, houses, compounds, cars that looked like Ethiopian, and that was a lot of fun.
Did you use a lot of I know there's that in Los Angeles, there's that one block that has it's almost like little Ethiopia. Did you use some of the people there?
I actually used a lot of, because the film is set in Ethiopia, I used many, many individuals from the community who were interested, who wanted to participate as extras, sometimes as, actors as well. But because the film was set in 1960, I had to find locations that looked like they were from 1960, and that looked like they were also, that they could be in Ethiopia. And that street looks like a typical American block.
Yeah, sure.
So unfortunately, I couldn't use that street. But I shot within a radius of about 150, 180 miles of Los Angeles. So there were sections of Los Angeles, for example, there was a radio station that was built roughly in the 40s, I believe. So I used part of the radio station, the interior, and I used the towers for the radio station.
Right.
And I used, there's a park called Greystone Park, which was a mansion that was built by an industrialist at the turn of the previous century. And I used the grounds and part of the house as, part of the emperor's palace.
Right.
And then I went to, as I said, within 180 miles, there were orange groves that I used as a backdrop. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And now, like 5 years later, the orange groves were replaced by freeways, so that is no longer there.
Yeah.
Because Los Angeles itself is shifting very, very quickly.
Yeah. I was wondering what are some of the challenges that you have, because you were born in Ethiopia, you came to the United States, so in some ways you're an Ethiopian filmmaker in the United States, but in some ways you're just a filmmaker. Considering the questions of identity, on the one hand, movies transcend national identity, so it doesn't really matter where the filmmaker is from. Our class, as I told you before, we studied the genre of the Western, and in my opinion, and I think most Americans actually, prefer the Italian spaghetti Western better than the John Wayne Westerns. But they're not really American, but they are almost more American than the American one. In other ways, though, the identity of the filmmaker does matter, and your movies are mostly about your homeland. So what are your views on issues such as national, transnational, global, and local relations among the film, the filmmaker, and the audience, or maybe multiple audiences in your case?
Well, as an artist, my starting point is actually the stories or the visions that inspire me. And oftentimes these stories, these visions that inspire me are connected to my makeup, are connected to where I grew up. In the same way, for example, if you are John Sayles, an independent American filmmaker, Steven Spielberg, obviously a very well-known American filmmaker, or Jane Campion, a filmmaker from New Zealand. When they make stories, when they write films, when they try to create a film, their starting point is not, okay, now let me start thinking of New Zealand as a source of film, or let me start thinking of the United States, Seattle, Washington as a source of film. They think about stories. So in the same way, when I make a film, I don't think about questions of identity because I don't need to. They're integrated within me. If I start thinking in terms of identity, what will happen is there will be some distance between the film that is created and myself, because I've already essentially made the subject matter that I'm doing as the other. I'm looking at it as if I were an anthropologist or a sociologist, as if I were studying it. And I feel as an artist, if you're studying something, then you're transitioning from being an artist to an academic. You are, examining, you are, thinking about it in intellectual terms. That's not to say that there isn't analysis when you write a script. That simply means that when you're writing a script, you're analyzing already the material that's contextualized within your DNA, the material that's contextualized within the stories that you grew up hearing. On the other hand, for example, if someone came and said, here's lots of money, and this film takes place in Helsinki, Finland, if I'm connected to the film, I will make the film. But will I spend 3 years to raise money for a film set in Helsinki, Finland? Probably not. So that's how far my identity goes for Helsinki.
I actually know an Ethiopian guy who lives in Helsinki.
Yes. I was using him as an example.
But, like I'm thinking that you use John Sayles as an example, and John Sayles has a movie that's set in Mexico. He has a movie that's set in Kentucky during the 1920s and 1930s. He has another film that's about a space alien. So, it's like...
But if you look at... I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, so he's all over the place. And the example that I used of the Italians who are fascinated with American Westerns, even though they're not from there, there's a fascination with other places as well. So I'm wondering how that works.
Well, you see, if you look at John Sayles' films, thematically they're the same. Thematically, they work within a particular range. They're set in different geographical locations. But when I say, DNA, I don't necessarily mean what language does the person speak. I don't necessarily mean what color skin or what identity, citizenship, etc. I mean in terms of the core vision, the core values of individual filmmakers. So, for example, John Sayles, I don't know if you guys are familiar with his films. He's made many, many interesting independent films. John Sayles.
Unfortunately, I didn't assign any of them. That was just oversight on my part.
Okay. So John Sayles works on themes such as injustice. So whether the theme of injustice takes place in Kentucky, as in Make One, or in Mexico, or in the, many of his films actually just deal with injustice if they are politically inclined. And then he makes other films that are less political and more personal. And again, you will find the thread that connects each of these films to John Sayles, the artist, the filmmaker. 1 second. Let me open the window so there's more light.
Oh, thanks. And as
there we go. Okay.
Okay, good. And as a segue, we can talk about, like, as a filmmaker, your use of light.
Well, for those of you who are interested in actually making films, light is expensive. You have to rent light. That could eat a big portion of your budget unless you've amassed a fortune to make a film. So oftentimes I set films outside using natural light.
Right.
And right now, the artificial light in the office didn't work, so I just had to open the window in order to illuminate there. So, in terms of light, I could talk about, for example, tumult. Tumult, I wanted to make, again, for example, it ties into what we were talking about earlier. I wanted to make tumult in the style of a noir. In case you are not aware of what a film noir is, these were films made in the 1940s and the 1950s primarily.
Yeah.
Stephen, I'm talking to your students, not to you about noir.
Yeah,
I know you know what noir
like Maltese Falcon, The Big Sleep, and stuff like that.
Yes, and many of these films, again, they were made, just to give you a quick historical context, they were made in the 40s and 50s, and at that time, the studio system was breaking, so the number of people that were hired within the studio that were there on a regular basis were becoming less and less, and also the filmmakers wanted to go out of studios and film in natural settings. When they do that, they had less access to light, and they also wanted to use available light or just certain certain lights, individual lights, key lights, etc. All of these things, both sociological and artistic, created a particular style called film noir. And in Tumult, what I also wanted to do was to make a film, because a film is sort of a political thriller. The main character tries to flee from government forces, and oftentimes it was at night. Right. I had limited resources with lights, so I was able to have high contrast lighting. So I had few lights, spotlights, individual streaks of lights, etc. Again, trying to be inspired by the lighting created within film noir. And also, in terms of the style of the film, a man trying to escape, people going after the man, oftentimes at night. These were some of the things that inspired me to also make the film into a noir style film. And the film was also shot in black and white. That was an aesthetic choice rather than a financial.
It sounds like, so when you're making a film, you adapt your technique to the kind of film that you're trying to make, and it could be, I was looking at the YouTube video of the documentary you made, and it looks very, very different, obviously, because it's a documentary, but it sounds like, depending on what kind of film you're going to make, you're going to make very different choices about narrative and lighting and
Absolutely, and resources make a huge difference. So now to transition to the other film that Stephen is talking about, it's a documentary on Emperor Haile Selassie. Emperor Haile Selassie was the last, Ethiopia had a monarchy for 3,000 years, and the last monarch was Emperor Haile Selassie, who lost his throne in 1974. He came to power in 1916, so he was there when you guys had Woodrow Wilson. Right. And he lost his power when you guys had Gerald Ford, Nixon. So that was a very long time period. Right. Now, when I made that film, I had about 9 months to make the film, and I also had a very limited budget. Now, in terms of considering your resources as filmmakers, for example, I could say I want to make this kind of film, and let's say that kind of film involves a lot of camera movement, involves a lot of locations, etc., going to different locations. If I don't have the resources or sufficient resources to make that film, what will happen is there will be a discrepancy between my vision and the reality of the film, what I'm able to do and what I want to do. So as I become more and more experienced as a filmmaker, what I try to do is to match my resources with the style of film that I want to make. So, for example, in Twilight Revelations, I had 9 months to make the film, which is not a very long time, and I also teach full time.
Right.
So there were a number of considerations. It's not just financial, it's not just artistic. I wanted to make a film about that era using the testimonies of individuals who were adults at that time. So when I say at that time, the film ends in 1975. I'm making this film in 2009.
Right.
So all of these individuals were in their 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Right.
So most of these individuals, are, elderly, and they're mostly at home. And I'm also making a historical film. For example, when you guys see a documentary, if it's not historical, you can actually go to the location of the event that this film is about. So you have a lot of activities that you can see. When you're making a historical film and the event has already passed, unless you reenact, which means lots and lots of money, and also I sometimes believe that's hokey as a style.
Yeah. Me too.
Or unless you have lots and lots of money to make a narrative film. For example, some of you may have seen JFK, Oliver Stone's JFK, which is about the assassination of President Kennedy. It's a historical but also fictionalized account of JFK. So unless you're making that kind of a film, you have limited choices as to the style of film that you want to make. So what I wanted to do is first interview these individuals who are elderly, and so they're mostly at home. And number two, interview as many of them as possible, because I don't know when I would be seeing them next, because they may not live very long. So within a short time period, how do I get many, many people? And then obviously that's going to be a straightforward interview.
Right.
A straightforward interview is going to determine the style of film that you're going to be making.
Right.
So Stephen was referring to a style where you have, again, many of you may be familiar with this, when you see a lot of PBS historical documentaries, where you see individuals being interviewed straight on the camera. Then you see photographs, animated, and then you also see archival footage.
Right.
Okay, so there were a number of considerations into the making of that film and the style of that film. So there's, as I said, resources, there's style, there's also, again, the context of the film itself. I wanted to interview as many people as possible. And these individuals are not mobile. The event has already passed.
Right.
So all of these determine the style.
And I imagine if when you're interviewing people about an event that happened, I guess it would have been 20 years or over 20 years before you were making the film, one of the issues that you're confronting as a filmmaker is that people have imperfect memories. And one of the things that I noticed that I actually really like about the movie Teza that Haile Gerima made is that it's a movie about Ethiopian history, but it's also a movie about memory, how people remember. I was wondering, but what was your experience working with Haile Gerima, and also what stylistic choices do you think he was making in order to communicate the problem of memory and how we remember history?
I see. Well, even when the script was written, it takes place in 3 different places, 2 of them in Ethiopia and 1 of them in Germany. Originally, when the script was written, that actually took place in the United States.
Oh, you moved it to Germany.
The German part, yes.
Oh,
but there wasn't any funding from the United States. And so it takes place in Germany. However, historically, there were many thousands of Ethiopians in Europe at that time, and there were thousands of Ethiopians in the United States. Haile Gerima was a student in the United States at that time, so that's why the film was originally contextualized or set in Ethiopia.
Right.
And it moved to Germany. But in terms of memory, even within the story, even within the script, the film took place at 3 different times. The main characters. Remind me again, sorry, Stephen. You guys have already seen the film?
Yes.
Okay. So part of the story takes place during the childhood of the main of Anberbur, the main character. It also takes place when he returns after Germany, It also takes place in Ethiopia in the 1970s during the period of Red Terror.
Right.
And then it also takes place in Germany while he was a student there.
Right.
So,
and it also takes place in 1990, right before the Civil War.
Yes, and that as well. So there are multiple time periods in which the film is set. Now, when Haile edited the film, it actually looks different from the way it was written, and that's actually quite normal. I mean, many filmmakers start out with a script of a particular, chronology, and then because of certain, situations that happen in the shooting, in the production, and because of what happens in editing, you make discoveries. There's flexibility and there's movement in terms of how the narrative is constructed.
Right.
So, for Haile, hello.
Hi. Yeah. We're communicating with.
Hello, Doctor.
Hi, we're the people from Ethiopia are coming in.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
So hopefully that you'll be able to see them too.
Okay.
They're calling in right now. But anyway, continue.
So anyway, so even in the way the story was constructed, it was fractured.
Hello? Hello?
Hold on just a second.
Yeah, I cannot hear you, Doctor.
That's fine. Can you hear me?
No, I cannot hear you now. Yeah, a little bit.
We are talking with Yamana Demisi about the movie Teza. Can you hear me about that?
Okay, Doctor.
Can you see him?
Yes, I can see him now.
Okay, good. All right, Yamana, go ahead.
Okay, so in the way that the film is structured as well, because of what happened to him in Germany. As you will recall, the film starts out with him.
Would you use the external microphone, please?
That's fine. He doesn't have one, so you're going to have to. He'll speak as loudly as he can, and hopefully, if you can turn up the volume, that's the best we can do. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Can you hear me now, Dr. Tesfaye? Can you hear me?
Yeah, much better now.
Okay, very good. Okay, so hold on 1 second, I lost my train of thought.
You're talking about the structure of the movie and how the changes in the story.
Because the film begins with him coming out of an operation room, right. And that is what prompts the journey towards Gondar, towards his childhood. And after that, his memory takes him back to multiple time frames and time periods. Right. We're not exactly sure. It's not exactly sure. So the starting point for the film in terms of time is Amber coming out of the operating room. After that, we're not quite sure when the film is set.
Right. Was the movie deliberately confusing in the way? I mean, because when you first see him coming out of the operating room, we have no idea that this is because he was beat up in Germany, right? And it's not until the end that we discover that. And then the movie is moving back and forth between multiple time periods. It seemed to me that it was really forcing me as an audience member to pay attention and try to piece together what I'm seeing. It wasn't explaining it for me, and so that seemed very intentional to me.
Yeah, I mean, again, now I can only speak as a viewer because Haile is the filmmaker, so I can only share my perspective. Right? I can't speak on Haile's behalf. I'm not speaking on that.
All right. What? How if I do that? Now we can see everybody. Yamane, can you see the class in Ethiopia?
I can either see them in full frame, or I can see yourself and myself. I can't see all three simultaneously.
Okay. There's a little, one of my students just pointed out to me, there's a little button on the top right that has like a crowd of 3 people or something.
There we go. Okay. What that did is it just magnified. Now I have everyone. There we go. Now I can see everybody. Thank your student for me, please.
Yeah, thanks. It's funny that I'm teaching a class on technology and I'm really bad at technology. So how would you explain the technique of Teza, and how are you different from that? I mean, how is your technique, how is your approach to filmmaking different from Haile Gerima? I mean, you worked with Haile Gerima, but I've only seen a few clips from one of your films, and it seemed to me that your style was very different from his, from what I saw. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
I don't know. I mean, the films that I've made, all 3 of them are very different, and I don't know if I necessarily see my film, you know, in tandem or in contrast with Haile's films. I think even for Haile, for example, if you looked at Imperfect Journey, if you looked at Harvest 3,000 Years, if you looked at Asa, they're all different. Right. So I don't know. I mean, stylistically, I mean, I would say that Haile works a lot more potentially with time. But then if you look with narrative time, but then if you look at Tumult, I play a lot with narrative time as well. So I don't know if I can necessarily do a comparison and compare and contrast with Haile as a filmmaker myself. Haile is one thing I can say is obviously, which is very obvious, is Haile is an extremely accomplished filmmaker who has made many films. I haven't made as many films as Haile. Other than that, both of our films are, you know, our films are set in Ethiopia, many of them. Yeah. I mean, so are many American filmmakers. Their films are set in the United States, but you know, we focus on different subject matters potentially, but as do many other filmmakers. So I don't know if I can necessarily do a comparison like that. Right,
but like Sankofa I think Sankofa was filmed in Ghana or something. Is that right?
Yes. Sankofa was shot in Ghana and in Jamaica.
Oh, I didn't know that.
The plantation scenes take place in
Jamaica. Oh, right. But when I look at a film like Sankofa and I look at a film like Teza, to me, and my students haven't seen Sankofa, but for me, what they have in common is that they both use flashback technique a lot.
They use what?
Flashback.
Okay.
Like there's movement back and forth in time. And in some ways, speaking as an academic, I might categorize them as modernist in the way that they have consciousness and juxtaposition of very many different images. It's not a smooth narrative. It forces the audience to work hard.
Yes, and if you haven't seen Tumult, but Tumult does the same thing. There's a lot of play with time. There's a lot of flashbacks in Tumult as well. So I think also it's dependent on the kind of film that you're making and how you want to make it. I don't know if it's necessarily consistent. So, for example, if you look at Adwa,
right,
which is another documentary that Haile made, I would say that is, you know, pretty straightforward in terms of narrative.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing about Imperfect Journey. And if you look at, he's made a number of other films, so I wouldn't necessarily say that is particularly Haile Gerima's style. I would say, like any filmmaker, I think the style emerges from the film itself and the content of the film itself.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm thinking back. I mean, it seems like this is a big, hard decision. If you're making a noir film like Tumult, I think a lot of the great noir films that I've seen, I'm thinking The Third Man, it starts off as a puzzle, right? So you're trying to figure out, I mean, that's part of the thing that makes an audience interested in the film is that it begins as a puzzle. And historical films often begin as a puzzle. You're trying to figure out what's going on in history. But that's not how Steven Spielberg tells it. You know, if you look at a Hollywood film about historical drama, they tend to be very romantic and grandiose, and it's a very smooth narrative from beginning to end, and everything's chronological. That's the Hollywood historical film, which is very different from the kind of historical film that I think you and Haile Gerima are making.
I don't know. I mean, for me, I understand what you're saying, but what happens is when we come up with generalizations, then it rather simplifies filmmakers. For example, if you look at Munich, Steven Spielberg's Munich,
Sure.
it is not a straightforward narrative.
Sure.
Whereas if you look at, for example, if you look at Jaws and compare it with Munich, it doesn't look like they come from the same filmmaker.
Or even Lincoln.
Or even Lincoln. There you go. So I don't know. I mean, I think we can find, or we could hold certain common narrative or techniques that are similar, you know, within a particular industry. But then it's very difficult to then come up with a generalization saying Hollywood film. I mean, I think that helps academics, and that helps, you know, students to learn about films, because if it's chaotic, if there aren't any general rules, then it's very difficult to study something. But from the artist's point of view, it's problematic to work with those models, because then I feel like if you are from Hollywood, you only make films that play straightforward. You know, their narratives are chronological, and once you step away from Los Angeles and you go to, let's say, I don't know, San Diego, all of a sudden the time shifts in terms of how you. And I'm being, you know, facetious, obviously.
Right.
But so it's very difficult to come up with such generalization from the point of view of the artist.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. We already talked about this a little bit, but you completed a documentary about Haile Selassie called Twilight Revelations, and you're now working on a new 6-part documentary about the history and culture of Ethiopia during his rule, from the year he was crowned emperor in 1930 to the year of his death in 1975. Can you summarize your vision for the project and discuss some of the difficulties that you think you're going to have in completing it? I mean, it's a huge project.
Yes. First of all, in terms of how it's going to be constructed, I do not start with a thesis, meaning I don't have a conclusion as to what the film is going to be about. Right. I've interviewed a number of people, more than 300 people, and all of them, the focus is on narratives and not on statistics. You know, as you pointed out earlier, events taking place 50 years, 40 years, you know, behind us, it's very difficult to come up with accurate statistics.
Yeah.
And for me as a filmmaker, what interests me, because I'm not a statistician or I'm not coming up with a poll, my focus is on narrative. So,
hold on a second. Testify.
I noticed it.
We're getting two voices. We're getting you on the phone and we're getting Yamani at the same time. All right.
Hello.
Sorry, Yamani. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, 1 second. Let me try to recall what I was saying.
You were beginning the documentary with questions, not with answers. And statistics is the problem.
Again, so what I'm doing is, I talk to each individual about what they've witnessed and what they've experienced.
Right.
And the stories are going to emerge, or the narrative thread is going to emerge on the aggregation of the commonalities of these narratives.
Right.
Rather than me saying, okay, this is the banner, or this is the thesis statement, what can I do to find statements or stories to support that? Right. So it's going to be sort of a journey of discovery, as opposed to me telling people what the era was like. So the era is going to be determined by the memories themselves of these individuals. I
find that as a teacher, that's one of the things that I struggle to impart to my students that it seems like, I think maybe because they learned this in high school, they have to have a thesis at the beginning. And I always try to say, no, you need to start with the question first that you don't know the answer to, and then try to figure it out instead of starting with your answer. As a teacher, when you're teaching film, is that something that, I mean, the students pick up on that because you teach film?
Yes. Oftentimes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oftentimes, when people are writing scripts, they might want to, generally what they try to do is they try to come up with a conclusion. For example, this is the theme, or this is the idea, this is the lesson that I want to impart, and they already know what their film is about before they start writing their script. But what happens, even in terms of how we experience the narrative, what happens is that the audience itself will also know the ending of the film because the filmmaker has started the journey by knowing the ending of how the film is going, what the outcome of the film.
So we stop watching after 5 minutes.
So what is important is whether you're making a documentary film or a narrative film, is that the concept of journey, discovery is integrated into the construction of the film.
Let me, since we only have a short amount of time, and we're really lucky to have the technology actually all working. I was hoping, Tesfaye, do the students there want to ask Imani a question about Teza or about any of his projects?
Yes. There are so many students here, but we are struggling to just, we have external speakers, and we cannot hear you properly, but your picture is very nice. We can't see you all, but there is a big difficulty to hear.
We're recording it, so we can put this online later, but do the students there have some specific questions that they want to ask Imani? Do any of you have some specific questions that you really want to ask?
Oh, yeah, okay. So, okay, wait. Okay. One student is going to raise his question.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Ran Buddha. Okay, I wanted to ask one question regarding the ESA film. Okay, what makes different the ESA film from the other Ethiopian film? What about the setting this film? The other films are just the setting is here in Ethiopia. The ESA film setting is where out of Ethiopia. So what makes it different in other films? Thank you very much. This is my question.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
Yes.
I think he was. Could you repeat that? I think he was asking about how you would compare Teza to other films made in Ethiopia.
That's a very difficult and very broad question. So I can say that with ESA, the thing is I haven't seen all the films that are made in Ethiopia. I've seen a number of films, and these films are very, very different in style and approach. I would say that Haile has been making films since the 1970s.
So when you say that the films made in Ethiopia that are part of like the local film industry there are different in style and approach, what do you mean by that?
I would say that most of them, for example, are set in contemporary times.
Yeah.
Most of them explore, or many of them explore contemporary social, ailments, or what they're comedic. The context is present-day Ethiopia.
Most of the ones that I've seen are look like family comedies or something like that.
Yeah, or even family drama or heist films, etc. Many of them, I would say, are genre-based films, which is not a good thing or a bad thing. These are the styles. And I would say that we referred to earlier in terms of playing with time. They have a lot of time frame.
So they don't play with time because it sounds like when you want to play with time the way Haile Gerima does, that's expensive. I mean, to do that.
Well, that actually depends on how you make films. Many films can be made essentially that look expensive but aren't necessarily expensive if you have access to locations. And sometimes locations you can get for a low cost, or minimum cost, or no cost.
Right. What do you see as the biggest challenge for the young generation of filmmakers in Ethiopia? I mean, the Sanskrit students, most of the students that we have in Ethiopia are taking this class because they have an interest in the future of film there. For decades, I was telling my students today that I wanted to find for them a film that actually had a positive image about Africa, and it took me a really long time to find a movie that wasn't negative about Africa, because almost all of the movies made in America about Africa are about horrible things. So, I mean, I guess that's my question: is what do you see as the big challenge for African filmmakers in a market that's dominated by Europe and the United States?
Actually, I would say that.
Hello.
Yeah, that's why. Do you have a question?
Yeah. There is a question. One more question, Doctor.
All right. Go ahead.
Okay.
I am Dhaka.
All right.
I want to raise more question in addition to the previous one, and the film focused in the rural area of Ethiopia by the time. Why the crisis was both in the rural and the urban area. Why not in the urban area? Why the filmmakers only focused on the rural area? The setting of the rural area, yes?
The movie Teza, why is the movie Teza focusing on the rural areas around Lake Kana?
Unfortunately, I can't speak on behalf.
I didn't hear you.
Okay, Yamane, go ahead, yeah.
No, I was saying I can't speak on behalf of the filmmaker. They would have to ask Haile that question, because he's the one who created the film. I cannot speak on his behalf.
Yeah, my guess is that the image around Lake Kana is so beautiful and so gorgeous. I don't think he could resist taking it. Is it working now?
Hello, doctor. Hoping that you will record everything is going now, I hope.
Yes, yes, we're gonna.
Thanks to us, I hope.
Yes. Are you still having trouble hearing?
Yeah, there is a big difficulty of hearing, yeah. But everybody is appreciating about Eza. Eza is a famous film ever made in Ethiopia. Very, yeah, professional. Everything is just beyond our capacity we ever made in Ethiopia. So we appreciate that. But some people are asking why the history of Ezra mostly focus on rural area.
Right.
The question, yeah.
Right. And Yamane was saying that he doesn't know. That was Haile Garima's decision.
And that they should ask Haile.
And we have to ask Haile that. And my answer was that I think it's because it was such beautiful scenery that Haile Garima could not resist as a filmmaker taking pictures of that scene. You know, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, these are very important questions. But like, for example, if the film is shot in Addis Ababa,
right?
Do we focus on what takes place in Addis Ababa, or do we say why is it taking place in Addis Ababa?
Right.
The question itself is, you know, I don't understand the question. If I want to make a film set in Lalibela, and then if someone asks me why aren't you making the film in Dawa, I would say the film takes place in Lalibela.
Right.
I'm not quite sure about, you know, the question. Is there another question behind the question? Like, what is it about? What's the problem about a film taking place in the countryside or in rural areas?
Right.
Why not? Is the question? Is the response?
Why not? Yeah.
I don't see. I mean, like, if the story is the context of the story is in the rural areas, then that's why it's in the rural area. If, for example, you have somebody from Kenya or from Zambia, and then they happen to be in Gondar, if it's not contextualized, it's why are the Zambians or the Russians or the Americans in Gondar? But if the story is about people from that area and it is set in that area, I don't know. I don't understand.
Why not? Yeah, that makes sense to me. And some of the movie does happen in Addis Ababa.
Yes.
You know, when he's in
a third of the film takes place in Addis Ababa, a third takes place in Gondar, and a third takes place in Germany. That's how the film is divided.
Right. That's how I understood it too, and I understood the film to be suggesting, not telling, but suggesting a relationship between those three locations.
Yes.
And that's what I thought was really interesting about the film, is that it shows you that life in Germany, life in Gondar, and life in Addis Ababa are all related to each other in ways that are not obvious or ways that are not clear.
Yeah. And also the main character, Amberber, grew up in that area, near Lake Tana.
Right.
He also works in Addis Ababa. And then he was a student in Germany. So these are locations that the main character, experienced life in.
Is that where Haile Garima is from? He's from that area too, right?
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
But he also lived in Addis Ababa and he lived in the United States.
Right. I'm waiting for Haile Garima to make a movie about Washington, D.C. because that's. I don't know if you've read Dina Mengistu's novel about the things that heaven bears, which is all.
I have. Yes, I have.
If you don't mind, I was wondering if any of my questions, if any of my students, do you all have any questions about Teza or about anything for Yamane? They're always so quiet. Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, I didn't clarify this. What was your role in the making of Teza exactly?
I was first assistant director.
Okay. what does that mean? Or
it means it could mean a number of things depending on the scope of the production. I can talk about specifically what I did within ASA.
yeah, please.
Essentially, the director has two individuals focusing on in two different areas. When it comes to logistics, you have the line producer, and the line producer focuses on the budget. The line producer makes sure that everything that you need, vis-a-vis, for example, meals, vis-a-vis the location, anything that's related to logistics not connected to the artistic component of the film is prepared. That's the line producer or the producer. The first assistant director makes sure that the actors are rehearsed and ready for the director, make sure that the production designer is ready, make sure that the camera operator is ready, so that all of the creative components are in place when the director is ready to shoot. And the assistant director also works with extras. For example, in ASA, there were many extras.
Right.
So coordinating the extras, again, not money-wise, but artistically. Does the director want the extras, in the left background, right background, in the foreground? What are they doing, in relationship to the main character? So, for example, if you remember the scene that takes place at the Gion Hotel, where one of the characters is shot, and in the background you see multiple weddings.
Yeah, that was nice. I like that.
Yeah. So, for example, what happens in that moment? Right? Which direction does this extra run? Those are the kind of things that
And you're paying attention to where the camera is and what you have a sense of how it will be edited.
Absolutely. Where's the camera? Where's the main character? Remember, because it's about the main character and his context visually.
Right. And I imagine that your ability to move back and forth between Amharic and English was really helpful, since there were crew from.
Yeah, because I needed to speak with the actors. If I had a translator, it would have been very difficult.
Right, but a lot of the crew was American.
No, actually, the crew was very international. There were filmmakers, there were crew members from South Africa, there were crew members from different European countries. There were American crew members, so it's actually very international.
Oh wow, I didn't know.
Also Ethiopians, yes.
And I guess probably from Germany, since funding came from there.
Yes, as well. There were Belgians, Italians, a range of range of nationalities. Well, I think it's 9:30, and I know you have a busy day, and I actually lose the classroom in a couple minutes. Okay. But I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to do that. My students really appreciate your getting up early in the morning to participate in this class. And I just want to say thank you, and I hope that you and I can talk again soon. Sure. Thank you very much, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Autodesai, and the students in Ethiopia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you. I really appreciate your cooperation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Our difficulty is only technology as you see now. So we hope that doctor may record it, and as usual may and we can hear it. I hope so.
Okay. I will do my best. That's fine. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you very much.
Right. Bye-bye.